Thanks for being here to the Hidden Curriculum Exposed symposium that we will discuss today with some guests from all over the world, from the United States, from all over Europe, and also discussants from our university. We are glad to have the opportunity to spend this time with our guests and with you as students, teachers, and public in general. We are really glad to do so because so many people manage to in some way to face difficulties and constraints in this period. And I said it before and I repeat it here, the pandemic is posing so much constraints, and you probably have to deal with a lot of things like kids at home, relatives to take care of, and work to do. So we really appreciate you to be here and sharing this discussion with us. I would like briefly to introduce Telearchitettura Editorial Board, who organized this symposium. We have with us Valeria Federighi, Caterina Barioglio, Tommaso Listo, under the official name of Telearchitettura, Edoardo Bruno, and Dalila Tondo, and I'm Daniele Campo Benedetto. Telearchitettura is a platform for the discussion around the opportunities of learning with new methods and tools in architecture, and to share the results of the School of Architecture of Polytechnicum. This is an experiment that is funded by the School of Architecture and the Department of Architecture and Design, and it is supported by an advisory board that gather some professors and scholars in our university. Our hope for today is to have a profitable exchange among us about the opportunity that will hopefully rise when we will be learning all together once again in person. Some questions that we, with which we engaged our guests are, how do we intend to capitalize on this massive scale experiment that we are also painfully carrying out today? What new methods can emerge and are emerging in this situation? And will these new methods work at the scale of the individual course, or at the scale of the entire institution, or another scale still? These are some of the questions. We are plenty of questions. But before introducing our guests, I leave briefly the floor to Paolo for welcome. Paolo is the Dean of the Department of Architecture and Design of Politecnico di Torino. Paolo, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you, Daniele. Really, the only Dean present today is Ilaria Valente. She is the Dean of the School of Architecture of Politecnico di Milano. I am the head of the Department of Architecture and Design of Politecnico di Torino. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for being here. Welcome to this webinar organized by Telearchitettura. Daniele already spoke about Telearchitettura and explained what is it, and I want only join a few words about this experimentation of this website. I think that Telearchitettura declines a sort of teaching experience at a distance, enhancing the elements that are an opportunity for innovation in the training, in the teaching of the project, and in the disciplines related to the built environment. So I think that Telearchitettura declines this objective in two main functions. The first is to establish a space for experimentation and comparison of the teaching of architecture and its relationships with society, the creation of communities between teachers and students, forms and tools. This space is open to professors and students from any academic institution. The second objective is the communication of the results of the bachelor's courses and master's degree courses in architecture at the Polytechnic di Torino, aimed at students from all over the world. Telearchitettura is a project born from the School of Architecture inside the Department of Architecture and Design of the Polytechnic di Torino, open to all the contributions of professors and students. Today, the webinar of today takes place in a moment very critical of rethinking the curricula of the master degrees in architecture just approved, and in a period that we could also define as a global transition. The pandemic forced the architecture schools everywhere to apply and test remote teaching on an unprecedented scale. A semester-long period, at least, of mandatory remoteness has allowed making an assessment of the remote teaching. Everybody appears to agree, and today we will understand if it really is as we think. Some exchanges are definitely less effective, some others, it turns out, are more effective. Some exchanges don't work at all, and some others work just as well. So design studios, we named the design unit Atelier, were the perfect setting for experimentation, as they are intended to foster a studio culture which is generally based on contact and sharing. And the so-called hidden curriculum of design studios was suddenly made visible by the impossibility to perpetuate it. How can this turn help shape a different studio culture, and should it? So there are a lot of questions to which today we will try to answer, or at least to make a contribution so that the main doubts can be dissolved. Now, however, I have to close because I don't want to take any more time from the planned speech, which I think are very interesting. Let me only thank the editorial board, Caterina, Edoardo, Daniele, Valeria, and Tommaso, the creative direction, Dalila Tondo in particular, and the advisory board, Michela Benente, Michela Barosio, Carla Bartolozzi, Silvia Gron, Emanuele Morezzi, Filippo De Pieri, Matteo Robiglio, Nicola Russi, Silvia Tedesco, and Elena Vigliocco. They have worked hard and very well to organize everything with great passion and professionalism not common. Thank you very much to everyone. Enjoy and have a good work. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Paolo. Thank you for taking the time to introduce this event. We are quite happy to be here and to have the opportunity to speak about these issues with you, with our school, and with our guests. As Paolo was saying, this symposium tries to build on the current debate on the changing landscape of teaching and learning the project of architecture. So there are a lot of complex questions that have arisen since this whole, as Paolo defined it, massively scaled experiment started exactly 1 year ago now. And to try to address these questions, to map them and try to give an overview of them and some attempts at trying to answer them, we invited actors, we invited guests that have key operative roles in European and North American institutions, and who will open a discussion with the coordinators of degree courses in architecture at Politecnico di Torino, and also with the students. We really hope to involve the students as well in this discussion. So we are very glad, really, to introduce our guests, who will take us through a wide range of experiences in remote, semi-remote, futurely remote design teaching, design learning, and try to elaborate on future perspectives. So the first guest that I would introduce is Patrick Flynn. Hi, Patrick. So Patrick Flynn is the head of learning development in the College of Engineering and Built Environment in TU Dublin. His professional experience includes working in New York and Dublin, and he has served on the board of architectural education of the Royal Institute of Architects in Ireland, which is the professional accrediting body for all Irish architectural programs. He has researched existing and new pedagogies and published on these in academic papers and conferences. Patrick, thank you so much for being here. I leave you the floor, please.
Thanks very much, Valeria, for the introduction, and thank you before that for Danielle and Tony. Great introduction. I'm delighted to be here. So I will now try and share my screen with you. So hopefully this will work. I'll leave it to you to let me shout and let me know if that's working correctly.
Yes, perfect. Yeah,
working.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so the title of today's talk is The Hidden Curriculum Exposed. My name is Patrick Flynn. I'm based in TU Dublin, and this paper will look at the question through the prism of enforced changes to the feedback in the world of online learning. In particular, this will look at what has been exposed in this process, and looking to the future, explores what we can decide to retain. In order to see what has now been exposed in the feedback process, it will ask a series of questions. What do we do now? Or perhaps more accurately, what did we do pre-COVID? And how did this come about? How do we perceive ourselves, and where does this come from? In other words, what are the origins of our profession? How are we coping with this enforced change? And what will remain afterwards? In examining feedback in the process of architectural education, Rainer Banham's essay, A Black Box, The Secret Profession of Architecture, makes a link between what makes an architect and their education process. He compares the teaching method somewhat unfavorably to a tribal longhouse with the enforcing of a code of conduct, establishing attitudes and values that are then played out in the profession. Students absorb aesthetic, motivational, and ethical practices, as well as language and even dress. Broadly speaking, what Bourdieu refers to as habitus, that is, embodied manners of seeing, acting, and thinking. These are common to us, be they fictional in how architects described in popular culture, such as Howard Rourke on the left, or real as in Erno Goldfinger on the right. Sevgi Turkan's research pointed to the importance of Alberti's book from 1485 on the art of building in the making of this construct. It announces the idea of the architect as sole author. In the design process, the architect applies absolute authority and claims ownership and credit. To quote, they must calculate the amount of praise, thanks, and even fame they will achieve, or conversely, what contempt and hatred they'll receive, end quote. This brings into focus the architect's judgment, as it is by this judgment that the architect is valued. This is what the architect contributes to society in relation to the design process. And as a result of such actions, they themselves are judged. This idea of the architect as sole author and judge over what makes good architecture is then played out in the field of education via the crit, short for criticism. The crit is the established doxa as identified by Bourdieu, where Bourdieu describes the doxa as that which is taken for granted and understood by the whole group in an unquestioning manner. It is the enacted belief of a group. The crit is seen as where the tutor's judgment of what is successful architecture is revealed. So how does a doxa or belief system get challenged? It can emerge through critique, or in our case, an external force has disrupted it, COVID. So the crit, where students present their work in a public setting, and oral feedback is delivered to them by jurors, which has been central to architectural education for close on 100 years, is now obviously no longer possible. We have an enforced change. When it comes to the idea of change, and in particular enforced change, Chris Lubeckman, in his paper Between Research and Practice, told of an analogous story of Christopher Robin and his bear. It's a children's bedtime story, in case you're not familiar with it, where the bear is carried upstairs to bed and his head gets bumped along each step of the stairs on the way up and on the way down, because Christopher Robin holds the bear by the leg. It is, as far as the bear knows, the only way of coming downstairs or going upstairs. But sometimes the bear feels that there really is another way. If only he could stop bumping his head for a moment to think of it. I often think of the story as everyone I know in architectural education and students of architecture are always stretched, we're always busy, and we're frequently bumped on the head with yet more tasks and deadlines. And rarely do we have time to think about why we do things the way we do and measure their efficacy. In other words, the space to question doxa. We have what has now happened to us has been described as enforced change, or less kindly, the panic pivot to online learning. In our case, the spatial setting for the crit has disappeared and been replaced with the online world. But it is not just the physical space that has changed. We now have a situation where the locus of control is shifting. To illustrate this point, on the right, you can see an extract from a series of diagrams I did more than 10 years ago that tracked the movement of students in the crit scenario, where the tutors always sit at the front, while the student population sits at the back in a less engaged manner and can drift in and out of the crit. With the tutor or tutors at the front of the room surrounding the student who's presenting, this is a physical manifestation of the spatialization of power as defined by Foucault. By using Miro and other shared platforms, no one sits at the back, as a student said to me recently in an online feedback session. Fletcher points out that students can participate and give their voice as equal participants in our virtual online sessions. And we can invite people from other disciplines, other countries, other continents into the discussion. The change impacts not only in how we interact in the physical space, it opens up feedback sessions to a wider range of experts from across different settings who can attend without the need to be there in person. We can also bend time with this technology. It is possible to use the online platform to allow the students to upload work in advance, see the work up close, comment ahead of the review, and then reflect and comment responding afterwards in a less stressful environment. This challenges the established roles we play and begins to ask questions of who we are as tutors and students. And crucially, what opposition exists to seeing feedback in a new way? Much of resistance to a new idea comes because we are either familiar with what has happened before and are comfortable with what we know and how we are perceived. In the old mode of teaching, we can see from Sedley Turkan's research that much of its origins come from Alberti's 15th century idea of judgment. The judgment then being transferred from the work of an architect to the education of an architect. The change to our way of working as tutors pre-COVID to the present can be thought about using the O'Hari window model. In the O'Hari model, two of the window panes represent self, and the two represent the part unknown to self but to others. The information transfers from one pane to the other as a result of mutual trust, achieved through socializing and feedback got from other members of the group. It meant as tutors in our present circumstances, we had to move to an area of cognitive dissonance, as defined by Festinger, where we were no longer comfortable with who we were. This enforced change reveals new information about our roles, why we engage the way we do, and what part we as actors play. In this process, we reveal the hidden part of ourselves, as well as our part in the hidden curriculum. This enforced change now places us uniquely to measure what has succeeded and allow us to change the doxa with our newly acquired knowledge. We can, in the Bourdieu sense, explore heterodoxy, which is about the challenge to what is taken as the way to do things. We can see that this challenge exists within a large discussion around how we give feedback to students. It can allow us to change feedback to a new dynamic of dialogue. Dutton pointed out the main problem with traditional crit is that it is not dialogical because of the structured asymmetrical relations of power. And to quote Dutton, no dialogue leads to less learning opportunities, end quote. The online world can, in contrast, mitigate against Foucault's identifiable spatialization of power. The crit has become online now, not bound by a particular space, and now is our chance to reimagine it as a discussion between all staff, students, and other outside voices, co-creating knowledge in a blended learning environment in the future, post-COVID. This bringing in of other voices opens up the possibility further of cross-disciplinary research. Will Hunter, in his article on the future of pedagogy in architectural education, outlines reinventing the school as an orchestrated network, one that not only includes tutors, but a range of expert consultants and different disciplines, to establish a community of practice of equals in the learning process, in the humble sense of parity between tutors and students and all of us learning together. This gives us the possibility of moving away from the architect as sole author towards architect as collaborator with other disciplines. It begins with the co-creation of knowledge in our newly constructed feedback sessions. This will lead to authentic assessment and deeper learning. In this process, the feedback can be used to bring about a new curriculum. This brings us to the concept of what type of curriculum is possible in this new co-creation of knowledge model. From this, we can draw on Dilly Fung's connected curriculum, where students connect with researchers. Research activity is built into each program. Learners make connections beyond their chosen discipline to the wider world, connecting academic and workplace learning. Learners work to outputs, and peer-to-peer learning is central. This curriculum emphasizes meaningful student engagement through applied, active, project-based learning that draws on multiple sources, be they academic, student knowledge and experience, and community knowledge, and provides students with ample opportunities for ethical and critical reflection and practice. The quality of critical reflection is best honed in the teaching environment of our new feedback sessions in our schools, as was the argument used for traditional crits, but a new model with greater co-creation of knowledge with students and external experts drawn from around the world will challenge students to a deeper level of learning. So they are no longer traditional experts, but rather they become expert learners. Cavan and McCarthy's research indicates that the most successful design studios are those where traditional power relationships are broken down. These are studios where the students become actively involved in the process, and where they have the opportunity to discuss their work with jurors and with each other, all within an environment of mutual respect. The most successful variations to the traditional jury format from the student's point of view are those where they are more involved in the process of active learning, be it online or in person. This ties in with Helena Webster's critique of Donald Shun and her exploration of the importance of the culture of learning. She points out that students learn in a variety of settings, from their peers, exhibitions, talks, as well as the tutors. In other words, we all learn together and from each other, back to that Humboldt idea of education. The role of feedback is to give space to let this happen. This is one of the themes that Peter Buchanan refers to in his article on The Big Rethink on Architectural Education, where he refers to the team CNUS. And CNUS stands for the intelligence and the intuition of a whole cultural scene. It is the communal form of the concept of genius. It moves us away from the old thinking of architect as sole author. The new curriculum can be connected and more centered on the co-creation of knowledge. To conclude, I've chosen perhaps a slightly clumsy metaphor. In the summer of 2018 in Europe, we had one of our hottest summers on record, even in damp and wet Ireland. In Ireland, it led to a drought for the first time in living memory. So we were subjected to an external force, nature, just like now it's COVID. Although to what extent our use of the planet has brought about both of these incidents is a matter of debate. This external change, combined with new technology, in this case the use of drones, allowed us to see something that had been hidden for 4,500 years. And here it is. A photograph of a henge, or a Neolithic earthwork, which was visible through that combination of changed event, drought, and new technology, drones. Likewise, the current pandemic allows us to see the fault lines of old structures of power in our curriculum and allows us the space to question what function do they serve. And now that we know they are there, what are we going to do? Will we take this opportunity post-COVID to embrace blended learning and allow us to reimagine a new method of feedback without the old locus of control, where we could explore the idea of architecture feedback processes, including many voices, a true community of practice, an orchestrated network in our connected curriculum. With this in our minds, we can decide what comes next and what will we hold on to. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. Thank you so much. This was a really great opening of the discussion, and yeah, I mean, you definitely unpacked the very core of the problem, no? Exposing the issue that we are now facing as a previously existing, but now utterly visible and faceable, let's say, challenge. No, this turning point is something is the result of something that was already ongoing. The discussion over what you call the belief system of the studio culture, and now this new connected curriculum that you speak about is to be challenged and constructed. We saw a glimpse of the tools that are now a normal part of our everyday or ordinary teaching and learning lives. So now we need to definitely discuss about these things and take them face on, challenge them face on. So thank you so much. And of course, there will be ample time for discussion later, because I'm sure that all of us have a lot of questions about what you talked to us about. Thank you. So I'm very glad to introduce the next guest, Johann Walsh. Thank you so much for being here. Just a few words of introduction. Johann Walsh is an engineer architect trained at KU Leuven, and a full-time academic staff member at the Faculty of Design Sciences of the University of Antwerp. His research interest focuses on design research methodology and architectural design education, and its relationship with research and practice. He's a founding member of ISTT, International Studies Territories in Transition, which is an interdisciplinary design research studio on building culture in non-Western urban and rural territories in transition, and is a founding member of EAAE Education Academy and the Arena Architectural Research Network. So thank you so much for being here, and I leave the floor.
Thank you, Valeria, for the introduction. I try to share my screen. Does it work?
Perfect.
Okay.
Yes.
So yes, indeed, I would like to report about an initiative of this EAE Education Academy. And in these COVID situations, after a kind of silence and crisis, how to continue, we decided to organize a set of workshops, 3 workshops about remote teaching, and 2 of them took place. So it was my idea to report about first insights. It's not very mature yet. It are just some reflections about maybe an unexpected dimension that came out of these sessions. It's not me only, it's together with Patrick, who you just heard, with Michela Barosio from Torino, but also with Mia Roth from Zagreb, all core members of the Education Academy. I just wanted also shortly to introduce, to explain that Education Academy is part of the EAAE, the bigger association. And within this, it is really a kind of community, a group that decided, because as Patrick says, there is never time to talk about what we're actually doing, to free up some time in this academy, which want to be a platform for exchange of best practices and knowledge, also to stimulate research in architectural education and through architectural education. We are also a think tank. We try to underpin what the association states or how we can reach advocacy for what we are doing. But we are also have become a do tank. It means that we organize this kind of workshops, but also teacher training sessions. So for instance, in the end of April, there will be a real didactic training, because often we as studio teachers, we just teach as how we were taught. And as we can observe, things change and situations change. So I think it's good to update ourselves and to also underpin our own teaching. We also have a blog and a repository of best practices, a bit more or less similar as the Telearchitectura website. So let's link to each other. So we have been really a community beyond the representatives of the schools. The former representatives are really educators, engaged educators among each other. And suddenly this was the way how we had to meet, and the whole interaction and energy was challenged. So this made us wonder how to teach if the format of teaching is so much based on this interaction, being together in the same room. What happens if there is suddenly this displacement of these faces to the screen, which you can see in this collage made by Mia? And how to work together when everybody is in fact on his own place. So I made 3 steps in this kind of thought that I wanted to present you. The first is about making narratives about space and in space. What do we mean with real and what's on display? If everything is on display, how do we learn students? How do we induce learning in the students? And the third one is questioning what happens if everybody stays at his own home and his own place, and what kind of connection or cocooning comes out of it. So first, some ideas about the first step, narratives in or about space and real or on display. In the first workshop, Pasquale May and others, they really stick to the basis on how to teach novice architecture students and how to have them discover space, how to have them discover spatial vocabulary, and how to discover that architecture is not about object and mass, but about the space that is articulated by the object and mass. Object and mass are instrumental to articulate space. This was what the Texas Rangers pretended and learned, and how Hayjuk developed his 9 square problem. So in fact, to a certain extent, it shows that architecture is digital in a way, void, solid. This is translated into black and white, line, point, plane. In fact, what we are basically doing is training and cultivating a way of thinking by substitution. We draw a model, we draw lines, we make surfaces black, and we pretend that this is space. So we learn to think in a kind of displaced way, never the real thing. We pretend to articulate space, but in fact, we are working on this surface while shaping our mind, pretending that it's 3-dimensional. We have developed these techniques, but already we have developed a kind of interaction with the screen to imagine these spaces. The conversation with the drawing, to which Donald Schoen referred to, has just been replaced with the conversation with the screen. So we use the flat screen to represent space. We work displaced, and I think that's probably why the move to remote teaching was in fact not that difficult. I think the difficulties were situated elsewhere. We are used to communicate through architecture on display. We have exhibitions, we put drawings together, and then something else happens. We can compare the multiplicity, the proximity of these things becomes another kind of agency in how to think about architecture and how to discover meaning. And again, in these COVID times, I think there certainly are tools that make this inherent feature of how we teach architecture more evident, but which are not alien to it. So in the Miro board, students put all these things together. They have to structure their work, and the structure becomes more apparent. So the structure is always visible of the work, not only each stage separated in time from week to week, but each week you have the structure as a construction in its own. It has always been like this, but now suddenly it becomes more visible, and you can zoom in on how the ideas are structured, and you're constantly structuring the whole thing. But the mechanisms, I think, were already inherent to architecture. And in the presentation of Thomas Ohms, it was shown that if you are aware of this kind of agencies that happens when you move in a surface, like serendipity of things that suddenly come together, and through associative thinking, you come on other ideas, you can also use this flat surface to make a story, to make a narrative. And he explained how students were actively experimenting with how to put the material on display in the Miro board as a kind of new ways of exposing and new ways of providing several meanings and several ways of reading a narrative. Some other central question in architecture was explored by Alessandro Ayuso in a PhD in the Bartlett, and he was wondering how it was possible that in the digitalization of architecture, gradually we lose the human scale and we use the inhabitation of the human person in a structure. And he referred to the sketch of Carlos Carpa, in which he says when Carpa was making a sketch, it was the same sensitivity in the human figure as in the structure, as in the interior of the room and the atmosphere. They were just one. How is it possible that when we start to draw by computer, we lose this human scale and this kind of sensitivity? And if you see the renderings that we are making, they are just dummies put in an environment. Often even the food doesn't touch the ground. So he was wondering whether this was necessary, and he invented a very hyper architectural type of being, a Puto, who today would be 465 years, of course. And he gave this Puto an agency, like you have this Second Life avatar figures. And he says, taking into account all these features of this Puto, when they come together with his friends, with his architecture neurotic friends, and all these putti go out, what will they do when they see a nice facade? And then in his fantasy, he tried to let this imagination work and put the scale of the Puto back in the architecture where it belongs. So his thing was that we can use these tools of imaginary representation to make our virtual world revive and connect to the human scale. And we can push this even further. There was a presentation of Nancy Colling and Vibeke Jensen from the Bergen School of Architecture, in which the students really started to develop narratives. They invented, in this case, somebody invented a kind of insect living in the water consisting of plastic waste pieces. And when these pieces come together, it starts to become a kind of animal. And this animal has a feature, by the way, of moving to collect all the plastic elements together and to make new amalgamations and concentrations of this plastic. A very real world that's completely imaginative, but it happens because everything, every thinking, every presentation happens in this virtual space, in screen, which becomes taking place in your mind as well. You can see the movie of this whole narrative on YouTube. It's really a fascinating story. So in a way, you can say that the narrative is a kind of a carrier for a particular spatial reality. And this kind of spatial reality becomes a particular new type of architectural outcome. The second stage, learning on display, when we have this screen, is it really a burden, or does it provide means to reach the students' minds maybe in a different way? And I think we are inclined to see it as a burden and as a kind of difficulty, an obstacle that is in between us. But maybe we should consider it in another, the other way around. There was a presentation of Aktan Achar, who really tried to push this thinking a little bit further. And his point with this group of students, you can see how he plays even with the screen and with all the techniques that this screen provides for being present with the students on the screen. And he used Minecraft, this game, with this kind of fictive worlds that look really ugly in the eyes of the architect, like first generation SketchUp drawings, the period when we all avoided the use of SketchUp and tried to really consider it completely forbidden and ban it out of the studio. But his point was, when people have fun, they learn. And when you build upon what they already know, and when you use the ways how they enter world and space with what they already can, you have a very effective way of learning. So entering the world that they are in, instead of pulling them out of their cultural milieu in order to immerse them in another artificially cultivated milieu. And then the question is acculturation by whom and for what reason. It also connects a bit with Bourdieu thing to which Patrick refers. And he referred to the educationalist Lev Vygotsky and the zone of proximal development. And Vygotsky says there is the zone, what the student already knows and already is able to do. And if you want to learn him, you have to get out of this zone, but stay near in the zone of proximal development. Then he will recognize things and he will learn, he will expand this circle, and he gradually will enter the zone that he can't reach immediately. So it's a kind of scaffolding, a kind of systematic expansion. And you always have to look this zone of proximal development. So you can say that there is what student can, but I think with this new technology and these new tools, it can be something different than what the teacher is able to do. So the zone of proximal development of the student is maybe something different than where the teacher can help with. So what is this end to reach then if this is not cleared out? Which zone is there to develop? So I think that we have to be careful in reasoning how to continue. And maybe we have to be aware that we have to deal with, that we are dealing also with another generation, and easier for me to say in my age than many of you. But Michel Serres has written a very beautiful book, Petite Poussette, the female version of Little Thumby, in which he really argues that because of how the world is now organized and we interact and communicate, we really have different ways of thinking. This young generation has really different ways of thinking and interacting and making views of the world. And maybe we in our teaching, architectural teaching, are not yet enough aware of how they are in the world. I speak of they, me, them. And it is worth thinking, I think, how to connect also at that level. The final step, connected cocooning or extended individuality. There were several presentations that realized that students had to stay in their room. So how can this room then be the laboratory for discovering architecture, if not the city, if not by moving out to other buildings and visiting other buildings? And they emphasized, in fact, the richness of this own room, for instance, by pointing to other things than the spatial things that we used to make in the studio, like sound. Listen to the sounds of your studio. Listening is always also a way of putting attention. So it is an inclination from the intention if we make this design, we are very intentional to attention, listen to what there is already. Stephen Hall has written in the introduction of Palasma that the view is putting us at a distance. What we see is there, but noise is bringing us in the space, bringing ourselves in the space. So this kind of condition was really focused on out of necessity, because students had to stay in their own room. And you can communicate sound through the media that we have easier than space. So very inventive things that were very aware of the situation of where students where they were situated, or pointing to your daily routine, analyzing yourself, your own being. So the own body, in fact, becomes the study of subject and the instrument to explore space. But also the own room is the way and the place where you are connected. There is not this interconnectivity in the studio anymore. And this made me think of a beautiful presentation of Beatrice Colomina, The Bed and the City in the Age of COVID-19, that she gave at the EAE ARCC conference in Valencia in November of this year, in which she pointed out to how also this isolation of being a COVID patient leads to other ways of being connected and interconnected through the screen, but also how we had to stay at home for work, and how the bed became the office, and how the relationships between the intimate space and the outside world are completely shaken and completely in a different relationship than before of this. Hugh Hefner from Playboy never came out of his bed because his bed was his office. So his bed became his device. Everything was over there. He was connected with the world through televisions, through radios. So if the bed with all its devices has become a kind of second skin, or rather clothes, and I think we are more or less in this situation now, what will happen when we are able to go out with this clothes full of devices and infect the world in its own? Shall we mimic working together in a way? What will be our interactions and interconnections consists of, and which world shall we share? So these were some thoughts.
Thank you, Johann. Thank you very much for your presentation. And there's a lot of things that you pointed out. I just underlined one of them that really hit me during your presentation, the way in which tools can change the way in which we behave and communicate one to the other. So this, I think this is a key point of what we are discussing today, and more in general, we are trying to do in our teaching and learning practices in our schools. So thank you very much for this presentation. And I would like to move to the next speaker, who's John Barton, who's with us today. John Barton is the director of the Stanford Architectural Design Program since 2008. So it's quite 13 years that he's doing this job, and he really reformed this program, introducing and embedding sustainability and rethinking the role of teachers and students in this architectural and design program. He has also been a principal of a renowned design firm, so he was also a professional, and he is a doctor of professional practice at Carnegie Mellon University. This is something that is not so common in Italy, for sure, and so it's really interesting to have this experience shared with us. In his work, in his research work, he deals with the student-centered discussion pedagogy and themes related to learning. So thanks, John, for being here. And I leave the floor to you.
Thank you very, very much. I'm going to share screen. Is that coming through? Great. So I want to touch on three things in my talk. What we've learned teaching remotely, what are the things that we'll probably keep? What are the things that we're going to need to respond to when we come back to something approaching normality? And I would say this is maybe, it has general components, but it also has some Stanford specific components, which I'll talk about. So what have we learned teaching remotely? Number one, we've learned that students are really stressed. They've had to be hypermobile for a variety of reasons. A number of my students, in fact, I'd say most of my students have moved 5 times since the beginning of the school year. The dorms have been open sometimes, they've been closed sometimes. Students have found places to live in Los Angeles, and then they moved to New Orleans, and then they moved to Minneapolis. And some of that is by their choice, and some of it is cost and family issues. They're working in less than ideal situations. I'm preparing we're on a quarter system at Stanford, and I'm preparing for classes. Today is the last day of the winter quarter, and spring quarter starts a week from Monday. And I've sent out a survey to students just to understand do they have connectivity? Do they have a quiet place to work? And it's surprising how many don't, that they're sharing a 2-bedroom apartment with their family or 5 people. They don't have a quiet place to work. They're all trying to get on the bandwidth at the same time. We have people straddling 8 time zones to take classes at Stanford. And Stanford, as an elite institution, has, I wouldn't say thumbed its nose at teaching online, but it hasn't been a primary component of what Stanford offers. And so we as instructors are relearning our craft and working with the students at the same time. And as we talked about, students are dealing with spotty bandwidth. And what I say it really has taught us is that the dormitory, and this is a Stanford specific and maybe US specific because of our tradition of residential housing for students, this dorm is a social leveling device.
John, sorry for interrupting you. I think your presentation is not going through. Maybe we are fixed on the 4th slide. I'm very sorry to interrupt you, but maybe you changed the slide and we didn't saw this change in our screens.
It should be students are stressed.
It is agenda by now.
Oh, that's weird.
Maybe
did it change now?
Not yet.
No, because maybe because we see your main page on PowerPoint application, but not the presentation screen. So you should maybe share the screen presentation. No.
Now, yeah, now you move to the 2nd slide, now the 3rd.
So what does it say students are stressed?
Yes, by now, yes.
Okay, so I'll just leave it like this.
Great.
So I'm sorry.
No problem.
I would say that the dorm is a social leveling device, and that the studio serves as a social leveling device as well. And something that maybe we took for granted as we taught before COVID-19. We're learning that some things just don't transfer to Zoom. Patrick and Johann talked a little bit about this. The sense of scale is really hard when you're looking at a Miro board or a Google Slides document. I find that drawing in the moment with students is pretty much lost. Collaboration is harder. Studio culture is absent. This is not all bad, as Patrick indicated. Some of the studio culture needed to change anyway. And the student-to-student teaching is limited, and that may be on us rather than on the system. What are some of the things that we will keep? I think that, and Johann talked about this as well, that the nice thing about presenting digitally is, in a sense, a linear sense of process and project development. The students see their work in a different way than a stack of tracing paper. They could see it if they laid it out, but they don't lay it out. It takes up too much room. But digitally, they see their work from class to class and the development of the idea. And so we're finding that this active curating their process for each class has led to a more sophisticated jump from concept to diagram to architecture. And students can see their learning and talk about their learning, and that helps their adjacent classmates. We've enjoyed the fact that we can be anywhere in the world and get together. I'm teaching a seminar course, and we've had visitors from all over the world. This symposium that we're in right now is indicative of that, and I think that we'll probably hold on to that in some way. I think that some enhanced connectivity will be useful. The integration of digital pinup solutions, Google Slides, Miro, Concept Board. I think we'll hold on to those, and they'll be useful because of what I said in the previous slide about how students engage in their learning. And obviously we'll hold on to the visitors to the class. And then I think we have a chance to look very carefully at what I call studio hazing rituals. The notion that you're not one of us until you've bled on your model at 3 a.m. I think we have an opportunity to rethink real connectivity, real connection to students, and redefine the studio when we return. What are some of the things that we need to respond to? We teach hand drafting at Stanford. I know that not every school does. We think it's really important that a student understand what a section is by actually cutting a section rather than having the computer do it. So we're going to have to find a way to do that, and we're going to have to come back and develop some courses to work with students who are continuing on. Same goes with sketching. It's just lost in the process of the digital approach. Integrating 3D printers, laser cutters, things like that, model making. As I said, Stanford has essentially required us to assume students do not have room to draft and build models. So we're going to have to reteach that and reintroduce it. I think we're going to have to be less agnostic about computer tools as well. Stanford, partly because we teach hand drafting, we kind of roll computer tools later in the process. And some students take to Rhino, some take to Revit, some take to SketchUp, some take to some combination of those. But I think if we're gonna start using Miro and some things like that, we may have to be a little less agnostic about how the students, what software they use and when they use it, but we'll have to see on that. I think we're gonna have to be open to what was silently lost and quickly respond. And what I mean by that is we don't know a lot of what we don't know. When the students return, the stresses they've been under, the movement they've been under, the things that they've learned on their own, we're going to have to be nimble, and we're going to have to respond to student needs on an individual basis and on a group basis. And that may require development of new courses. It may require the transition of different courses. It remains to be seen. I think the biggest thing is that the world has changed in the last year. And we have to be understanding that, and this may be a greater force in the United States, but students are focused on social justice issues in a way they weren't when the pandemic began. The Black Lives Matter movement, voting rights, and I believe that architecture schools, it's going to be incumbent on us to rethink our projects into socially relevant, socially timely, and straddle the line between real world and theoretical towards a real world approach and implementation. Everyday norms and practices are going to have to be reinvented. I touched on that on the previous slide, but I think that we're rethinking the dormitory life at Stanford University right now. And I wrote a piece to some of the folks who are working on that yesterday, and I talked about we have an opportunity to completely rethink the freshman and sophomore experience, because the freshmen weren't here this year, and the sophomores, or the freshmen next year will come into a new experience, and the sophomores weren't here this year. And it's just going to be different, and we have an opportunity, and I would argue an obligation to reinvent the classroom experience for these students. And then something that maybe is more experienced at Stanford than elsewhere, but we've grown used to, in the last year, a top-down development. We're told when to wear a mask, when to get tested, when you have to be inside, what you can do with how many people outdoors. And universities are traditionally bottom-up places. Faculty tell you, faculty develop ideas, and they work their way up the channel, and they find funding, and they find a place in the university, and the university as a whole takes credit for those developments. Returning to a bottom up from a top down is not easy. People don't give up power in traditional ways. And so I think it's going to be very interesting to see how universities respond to and require the leadership at the university to let go of that power and say, we're taking that back. It will be very interesting to see how the students who are so focused on social justice issues play into that as we go along. I think that is it. Yeah, I'll close right there. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Thanks for this presentation. And also in this case, there is a lot of things that hit me. The rethinking of the studio culture, the fact that we don't know anything of what our students experienced, and most of all, I would like to thank you for letting us think about the perspective of students, from the perspective of students. And this is another key element of what we are trying to do here. There's a lot of students that are with us today, and maybe we will be able to interact with them in a while. So thanks again. Rashida, is planned to be the next one. I will briefly introduce you. Once again, thank you for being here. Rashid Angert is the department chair and associate professor at Tyler School of Art and Architecture in Temple University, Philadelphia. And she is also involved in the Association of Collegiate School of Architecture in the United States. She has been part of the board, and she is past president of this association. I think until 2020, if I'm not wrong. And her research covers a lot of themes, but particularly the relationship between the built environment and nature, which in this moment it become even more relevant than it was before. So that's it. I leave you the floor, Rashida.
Thank you, Daniela. It's really great to be here. I'm going to start sharing my screen. And are you seeing this properly right now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. And I'm really honored to be with you today. I actually have been enjoying everyone else's talks. Patrick, Johann, and John, your reflections have really resonated with me, and some of the things that I've been just contending with over the last year. So I'm going to try to maybe present a slightly different perspective that's really focused on more social aspects of learning and how we can support our students. Having just passed the 1-year anniversary of the emergency closure of our university earlier this week, this is a really fitting time to reflect on the impact that this experience has had on our teaching and the implications of this as we look forward towards the future. We're trying to plan what our next academic year will look like right now. A few months ago, the Chronicle of Higher Education asked its readers what it missed most about their in-person experiences. And as I read through the list that's scrolling on the screen right now, many of the comments resonated with my own experience, reinforcing the importance of the unplanned, the informal, social interactions with other people that support our overall sense of belonging. Meetings in coffee shops, walking through the campus, the seeing and being seen, the overall sense of togetherness that is built by proximity to other people. Psychiatrist William Glasser defines a sense of belonging as one of the 5 basic human needs, along with survival, power, freedom, and fun. It is through our communities that we meet our need to belong. We cultivate our own self-identities. We establish positive emotional connections and maintain our own well-being. Dr. Charla Berry, a faculty and researcher of educational leadership, has connected the social benefits of community to an increased ability to manage stress and to build a healthy emotional state. Research has also shown that students who feel a sense of community are less likely to drop out of an academic program. And this is so relevant to architecture, where in the States, at least, we have just won, again, the distinction of our students spending more hours outside of class on their coursework than any other major in our university programs. The benefits of community include increased academic performance as well as other social benefits. Establishing a strong community also increases students' participation and ultimately helps them deepen their learning and understanding. And while this has been shown across both online and in-person contexts, this is understandably more difficult with virtual learning. With online modes of instruction, the risk of student alienation has long been documented. This refers to a sense of social estrangement, an absence of social support, and a lack of meaningful social connections, feeling cut off from family, friends, and within the context of schools, it's characterized by feeling disconnected from the teacher, from other students, and from the broader school community. Feelings of alienation have also been associated with negative student behaviors like self-isolation, failure, absenteeism, and dropping out. Characterized by three dimensions: social isolation, which is a feeling of just loneliness, even when in the company of others; powerlessness, which is the belief that one has little control over what occurs; and normlessness, the feeling that students don't relate to the classroom, that they don't relate to school norms, or they have difficulty conforming to rules and codes of context, or that their values and goals conflict with those of others around them. In an educational environment, such feelings can adversely affect student performance, student success, and ultimately their willingness to persist within the academic context. Students that feel they don't fit in fail to find their niche within the college, and they fail to develop commitment to the school and to our programs. Consequently, they tend to withdraw. So this is related to our student retention and ultimately the success of our programs. It's also been shown that strong feelings on only one of these three factors are sufficient to result in an individual feeling alienated. So it doesn't take all three, but simply one. And it's important to establish a strong sense of community among online students in order to help combat these feelings of alienation. Consequently, policies such as those adopted from our university that strongly discourage faculty from requiring students to turn on cameras can also perhaps reinforce students' feelings of alienation within the classroom. They place additional barriers to faculty in forming meaningful instructor and student-to-student connections, while they may be really important in terms of understanding the other contexts that students are dealing with within their home life. This is also just simply another barrier. At our institution, over summer 2020, faculty all completed development workshops and really looked at how to improve our teaching and develop true online methods after a few months of what we call remote learning, where we were just responding to an emergency context. At the same time, ACSA hosted a number of workshops with faculty across universities within our schools to share strategies to help faculty pivot under these unexpected circumstances. But the strategies that I'm going to discuss here are really focused on student engagement and strategies that I've used within my classroom to kind of respond to this situation. They include reaching out early to students. And one thing that was evident in both the ACSA workshops and also in the professional development through our Center for the Advancement of Teaching is that maintaining positive connections to students was essential. It's also important, and I'm going to actually show some examples from lecture courses, a lecture course that I've taught 3 times over the last academic year, not specifically a studio course. And the challenge there is, how do you create interaction within contexts that might lend themselves more easily to lecture delivery? How do we engage technology to really keep students engaged and to encourage discussion? And the last point here is what I think might be actually the most important, and it relates to our ability to connect to students really on a personal level. And this happens often at the margins of in-person engagements, where you can just have a side chat with someone, or you can notice that they seem a little bit down on a particular day, and you can check with them or even just smile at them to try to give them reinforcement. Within these mediated environments of virtual learning, that becomes a lot more challenging, and also consequently, we have to be a lot more intentional in doing so. So firstly, in reaching out early and often, one of the things that I decided to do was to schedule individual meetings with each of my students at the start of the semester. They were not required, but I'm happy to share that most of the students actually took me up on the offer, and we just spent 10 minutes talking together, and I got to know where they were living. I got to know what other stressors they had in their lives, how many hours they were working during the week, and what challenges they anticipated facing before we actually got into the semester. It increased the amount of students that are coming to my virtual office hours right now, which I'm really happy about, because they're coming to me for things unrelated to just my course, but to other things as well. It allows me to maintain regular communication to students, both in terms of the class, but also as other things come up in their lives. I also have the fortune of working with a peer teacher this semester who has been able to help me in this engagement of students by providing supplemental instruction and study sessions outside of class time. And also they facilitate a chat group for my students. The other challenge is really about limiting lecture time. And this is actually just a snapshot of my Canvas page, where I've had to construct a learning pathway for students that shifts some of the content outside of the classroom. And it's similar to a flipped class, but not entirely, but also includes student accountability so that they can stay on track, and also know that at the end of that there's some sense of accountability for actually doing the work. But then I've also found that lectures still are valued by students, and therefore I can reduce the amount of time that I'm spending delivering concepts to key concepts, which makes more space for those other kind of community building types of activities that I referenced previously. The technology also can really be leveraged in ways to support student learning, and I think as Johann and Patrick talked about, to challenge those power structures that may be more easily embedded within our physical space. So this is just an example of one of the tools. This is actually from one of my classes, just talking about different concepts and allowing each student to kind of have a voice. And also in this case, it's anonymous. So students don't have the same maybe risk in actually speaking up because they're able to participate in an anonymous way. And finally, this is the part that maybe has been most challenging, but also most rewarding. Trying to establish personal connections with students through an online environment is understandably challenging because of the, I think, risk of kind of speaking up. And one thing, my students established the group agreement right from the beginning of the class, and they asked me to provide a kind of flex time, about 10 minutes at the start of each class, where we could just talk. And I was really excited about this idea, but then learned very quickly that the same barrier still existed, and they needed some kind of prompt to be able to engage. So we've been doing question of the day and brackets talking about food and television shows and other cultural aspects of places around the city, just as a way to connect. And it really doesn't matter what we're talking about. The most important thing is that students are engaging and that they're being known and being valued within the learning environment. Just some quick results, some kind of a snapshot about what students were feeling about the class. And this is from the fall semester. So I was able to make some adjustments to this. And I think it's really important that we continue to get feedback from students, not at the end, only at the end of the semester, but as we go. So this is a really quick survey that I do with my students, even in person, about 5 weeks into our 15-week semester, to say, what do we need more of? What do you want less of? And what's really working for you? And what do you need to change about the way that you're approaching your learning? So one good thing is that more of the categories kind of increased in terms of the number of students that were feeling that the things that I was doing were supporting them, and that they also kind of reflect on what they need to change as well before the end of each academic term. So I'm just gonna conclude here with some questions that I still have about what this means for the future. And I think one reflection is that we often take for granted the building of a sense of community within in-person environments because we have so many ways to do that. And I wonder if we undervalue the kind of social and personal aspects of our interactions in favor of the more kind of content-driven academic context, and whether or not we need to rethink the amount of energy that's put into just cultivating a greater sense of community when at some point we move into some new degree of normalcy. I also want to say that, and John brought this up in his presentation, that social issues and really racial equity is at the center of our discussions and dialogue, and understanding how to change the power dynamics and really to receive and retain and support the varying needs of diverse students is also central to our discussions about the Academy moving forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Rashida. Thank you for a very interesting presentation. I think this is a crucial question that you were asking, really, about the complexity of the social aspects of learning, and presenting the design studio as a complex ecology that, of course, needs to be known in order to be addressed, and the constant feedback. I really like the methodologies that you explained, that you were speaking about, and I'm sure that there will be time to unpack these issues further. So I'm glad to introduce the last presentation, our guest Ilaria Valente. Thank you so much for being here. So Ilaria Valente is a full professor in architectural and urban design at the Department of Architecture and Urban Studies at Politecnico di Milano. She holds a PhD in architectural composition from the UOV in Venice. And since 2016, she is the Dean of the School of Architecture at Politecnico di Milano. Professor Valente has collaborated with international and national research institutions, and her research interest is in theory, tools, and design methods, with specific attention to the architecture of open and public spaces, urban morphology, and architectural typology. Of course, she's the president of CUIA, the Conference of Italian Schools of Architecture. So thank you so much for being here, and I leave the floor. The microphone is off.
I always do that. So, thank you. Thank you so much to Telearchitettura and Politecnico di Torino for your kind invitation. I'm very happy to be here with you, a tough group of young researchers and with some friends, the colleagues that give their contribution before me in a very interesting way. So I want to start in my speech talking about the modification of the teaching model of the studio and its different types. In a certain sense, I want to rewind the tape to look further after our experience during the pandemic and give evidence to some problems that we have to face now. So I don't want to be exhaustive on this topic, is impossible, but reporting some samples that concern the Italian context. And I believe that those can be probably extended to the international context. So I want, first of all, to analyze how the interdisciplinary studio model, that is very important in Italy, then we will see why and in which way, took shape from the model of the atelier, of the workshop in a certain sense. So I want to start from some assumptions. The teaching of architectural design is based on some pillars. First of all, the one of learning by doing. The second one, to learn in an environment where you interact with teachers, the studio. This didactic structure in its declination is congruent with the nature of architecture, understood as an artistic practice and as a technical practice. So, first type, the atelier, the bottega, as we say in Italian, so the workshop. So central to the atelier model is the figure of the master, from whom, with the typical craftsman practice, you learn the art of making architecture, and is essentially based in its nature on manual skills, drawings, making models, and so on, talk, etc. But we have to say that in the Italian context, at least starting from the second half of the 19th, the School of Architecture organized their programs in the form of the so-called laboratorio, the studio, in fact, with various degrees of interdisciplinarity. The studio, in fact, replaced the architectural composition courses, the one that I did when I was a student, when I was young, which were characterized by the presence of the teacher who, together with his assistant, conducted the design activity exactly in the form of an atelier. Even if with a relatively high number of students, this was the condition that we had. Since then, the studios have been characterized as interdisciplinary educational structures in Italy. but with varying interdisciplinary contribution intensity. What I want to say, that we have the architectural design studio, but simultaneously a disciplinary proliferation of the studios has generated. We have in our school the architectural drawing studio, the architectural design studio, the restoration studio, the building construction studio, the urban planning studio, and so on. Particularly at the level of the master degree, and in recent years, thematic studios that integrate different teachers of different disciplines around a particular topic. And this kind of topic often interprets the emerging problems, the emerging topics, also in the field of our research. Example given on the issues of sustainability, climate change, urban regeneration, architectural recycling, whatever, social housing, etc. The studio size in our school varies from 12 to 20 CTS. Therefore, from a minimum of 2 different disciplines to a maximum of 4, maximum 5 disciplines, because we cannot have small sites of credits. We have to work basically starting from 4 credits. And so we could put together some small interdisciplinary teams of professors. So consequently, we can say that in Italy, there are at least 3 types of studio. The studio is a simulation of concrete work in the shape of an atelier or integrated studio. The disciplinary studio, where disciplinary approaches and tools are tested at the various design scales. The research or thematic studio dedicated to frontier design issues involving different disciplines and topics, as we say. So depending on the cultural and teaching approach of each school, the models can be exclusive or coexist in each different situation. This premise, for me, is necessary to open a reflection on and some questions. What is in fact a studio? Starting from the atelier, the starting point is the simulation of concrete work. For example, in the integrated studio, one of the ideas that we had in the Italian school is that the architectural design professor is joined by structures, system, building physics, restoration, urban planning, etc., depending on the design scales addressed. This studio model corresponds in a certain sense to the canonical training of the architect as a designer. And so this is the first question is this simulation of concrete work still relevant for the training of young architects nowadays? Before, John said the world has changed a lot in the last year, but we are in a changing world in general, also in the domain of the work of the profession. Because our young architects will have need skills and abilities probably defined in a new way to understand and intervene in the contemporary built environment. Other question, how does digitalization enter the training of our students and the studio? In the samples that you showed before, we we saw that all of you, students and teachers, learned to use screens and to communicate by screens. But in fact, the problem is wider. How is the use of manual and digital tools contaminated now? Our students have already entered in a binary training that combines and contaminates manual practice and digital practice, a subject that also interests other artistic practices. Then, how will educational form change with the contribution of digital? We tested an accelerated way in this period, but we have to well understand how will the studio take place in the context of synchronous and asynchronous teaching. And we have to think of what do you do in the presence in the studio, and what do you do remotely? Can students, another question is, can students in presence and remote mode coexist in the same class? Now we have tried this experience in the so-called blended teaching. We had some problems. It's not completely easy, but it's a great opportunity, I think. Then, what can we use some digital tools? Example, at the Politecnico di Milano, a great discussion has been opened up on the use of recorded lessons, of recorded lectures. Can the recorded lecture become new textbooks, or which kind of use the student will do of our recorded lectures? Moreover, one of the decisive potential offered by the digital methods is virtually merging classes from different universities in the same country and all around the world. So it will be possible to build, in a certain sense, global virtual campuses. This is a great opportunity for us. Then, basically, does it make sense to imagine the simulation of concrete work in the studio in this condition, and in coherence with which form of organization of the architect's work? When this is also changing under the pressure of digitalization, complexity, and delocalization. So from this point of view, I think that we should carefully consider what, for example, is the content of some ethnographic studies that focused on practicing architecture. I want to quote here an issue of the review Ardet, an issue curated by Albina Janiva, whose name was Bottega, Ecology of Design Practice. And this is a very interesting issue because the body of the research is to demonstrate that architecture is a collective process of negotiation that merges different actors and different tools. Nowadays, a social, artistic, technical practice that appears as a composition of many heterogeneous elements, an assemblage, said Albina Janeva to us. And so which kind of simulation we could do in our studios, of which could be useful for our students to learn in our School of Architecture. So perhaps we should question the studio centrality in architecture school teaching structure, which should find a different cultural and organizational model. I think placing the students' experience at the center. So in a context in which the student is potentially and substantially hyperconnected, I believe that it's necessary to work on two main areas. I'm thinking about the university of the post-COVID university. I'm trying to think positive about the fact that we will go back to our campuses working with our students. And so thinking to this experience as something that we can use in a positive way. So the construction during the bachelor of fundamentals and tools, which must be solid, capable of restoring the profound meaning of the disciplines and the tradition of our disciplinary knowledge, as well as the rigorous acquisition of the necessary technical skills. At this stage, the intense manual work is essential in my idea. And I say that because during the pandemic, I had experience at the first year and at the 5th years of our courses. And I noticed the big difference working with the students of the first year in a studio has been very difficult. Especially in the period in which they didn't found the paper for making their drawings. It was very difficult to share ideas and drawings by the screen. And then they have been fantastic because they build their models with recycled materials, find at home old boxes and paper and newspapers and so on. But it has been really a strong experience. With the one of the last year, of the 5th year, was completely different because they were able to show us drawings as we saw before in the presentation of our colleague. So we are in two completely different condition of teaching and learning in the first year and in the master. So the bachelor is important that has an intense manual work and must be critically flanked at the start of education about the digital tools. So we have to go in parallel, but with a big training in with manual drawing and making models and so on. And so during the bachelor is probably we need a vertical learning sequence for putting in place a solid background. So having an idea of a propedeutical approach during the bachelor. But in the master, the student must be able to experiment, build his own path in his university and abroad, as already happens, go through different experiences. Basically, the student must move on an horizontal plane and learn to use tools and skills autonomously and creatively. In this context, I think the two issues are very important that we come into play. Space and time. So we have probably to redesign our school spaces to host activities in which teachers and students collaborate, studios, workshops, lectures, and so on. and spaces for activities that the students could carry out alone, for example, by connecting online lectures, studying, drawing. So have places in which the student could have time also to concentrate, to stay alone, and other space devoted to social relationship, as Rashida well explained. That is one of the main problem now, is to rebuild the community. I think that when we come back to the university, we have to take care of this problem. And then time. The student will be able to compose his time with different experiences, from courses and studios that take place in a large part of the time, to didactic experiences conducted intensively for small groups, workshops, hackathons, charrettes, experience on the field, construction of prototypes, travel, stage, etc. The student's time will be composed of multi-speed experiences in real and in the virtual space. Our task, I think, will be, and it will be difficult, to build a common ground for students, firmly linked to research and to the work environment, so to the external environment, to the city, to the professionals and so on, which can create capabilities that allow young people to find their way, solid at the foundation and capable of facing change with flexibility. So, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Valente. This was really a very interesting presentation. And I think that the issues of space and time are really something that we should discuss. It's clear that in the past year, a lot of what were before technical constraints have been overcome. We have run a mile across what were previously serious technical constraints. And now what we need to do is to socialize them, no? You mentioned interdisciplinarity, you mentioned the possibility, for example, of merging classes from different universities. Of course, these things are technically possible, but they need to be socialized. We are convinced that the issue of interdisciplinarity in design teaching is extremely important. This is also why we invited as discussants the reference of different courses in architecture, Polytechnico di Torino, as also as representatives of different disciplines of the design teaching. And also the fact that we need to involve the students, as also Rashida was saying before. And so we also invited as discussants a group of students, which I would like to give precedence to if the other discussants allow, and who will give us their own perspective on this matter. So I ask the students, Alice, Emilian, Eloisa, Valerio, and Ilaria, if you're here, I very gladly leave you the floor. Hi, Alice.
Hi, everyone.
Hi.
Valeria, sorry, Alice. Maybe if other students would like to intervene, they can write in the chat.
Definitely.
This will be, of course, encouraged. If you feel to intervene, please do that by writing in the chat, and we will be giving you the floor after Alice and colleagues.
Okay, so we were discussing on how do we imagine architecture courses in the immediate post-pandemic situation. So we thought a lot about this, and it is difficult to define a clear picture. It is necessary to understand what is for us the main aspect this pandemic has exposed in the academic context. We thought about communication, that it is a fundamental process used in all different dimensions. In our architectural multidisciplinary world, it is essential to have the possibility to communicate, not only through words, but also through drawings and all different vehicles we use to support ideas. So it's clear that it's not possible to measure the extent of this word, just as it is equally difficult to identify the innumerable amount of means by which one communicates. So this thought is at the basis of the reason why most of the attention is focused on this concept. As university students with different experiences, of course, deeply marked by the entrance of the pandemic into our small, big world, if we want to say, we felt we wanted to talk about sorry, I think. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Okay, so so we wanted to talk about communication as a vehicle to share. Sharing in this sense allows one to communicate at a higher level. So this reflection arises from the difficulties that were revealed with the first experiences of teaching and learning remotely. So with time, each person involved in this experience had to find which was the most direct and effective way to succeed in communicating. Now it is difficult to imagine going back to the dear old habits, because many obstacles that are gradually overcoming and knocking down explain that the best way to understand each other is perhaps the one we are already exploring with maybe thanks to the pandemic. In an immediate post-pandemic situation, we imagine that the tools we have been forced to use and which are now our daily routine will not disappear, but can be used to improve the connection between the different academic realities all over the world. We imagine an agile exchange between the different universities and lectures that can have didactic contribution without the physical movement of professors and students, and with a simpler bureaucratic process. We also imagine collective moments in which students from different universities can participate in general reviews, final reviews, to see, learn, and also share and contribute with their own ideas. So we are envision a wider general sharing of ideas for a greater growth of architectural education. So our question is, how can we improve this connection between universities, and if it's possible, if there is a better way to do that or not, or so. Thank you.
Thank you, Alice. Thank you. And I'll give the floor after you to Ari Avda. I hope to that
Hello.
didn't mispronounce your name. Sorry for that if I did.
Hi, it's fine. My name is Ari Jawada. Ari, like, okay, you stress on the J.
Floor is
So,
yours.
okay, thank you. I just like wanted to comment. And first of all, I just want to say thank you to Telearquitectura for giving us such like it's an honor to be a part of this webinar. And thank you to all the speakers. And I just wanted to say something about like what Professor John said about like worrying about cost, comfort, quiet place, like etc. And I think this is very important because now during this pandemic, we're doing basically online exams and tests. And I think disregarding the stress of the exam, we have like other stresses as well. And example, stress of like the noise background, stress of the Wi-Fi, and stress of technical malfunctions. So I think that's like something, of course, like what students really think of me being a student in Politecnico di Torino. And also Professor Ilario said something I would like to comment about. Learning by doing, and I think that's very important since I'm also like in bachelor's of Politecnico di Torino, and I think experimenting, doing stuff by hand, also mentioned by Professor John, the hand drafting, I think it's very vital and important. And one last thing about the recorded lessons, I think it has both pros and cons. And being in Polito, I would say the pros is basically getting to rewatch, and if we missed any part, we can take and share it again later. And the second pro, I would say, is having people like all around the world watch the lecture when they feel like they're most comfortable while watching, maybe not in the middle of the night where they're probably like not ready. And the cons for recorded lessons, I would say, is like during the recorded lessons, you might feel like you're not like obligated or excited to take notes, which I think is like a con and a disadvantage because like you can just like watch the lessons whenever. And the second con I would say is you also feel like you don't have to enter the class. And that means like there's less students participated in class. Like for example, today I was in a class where there was just 9 students and I felt where there should have been like 100 students or something. And I think the recorded lessons could have like disadvantages as well as advantages, speaking from a point of view of a student. So yeah, and thank you so much, Professor Ilaria and Professor John and the other speakers, Rashida and everyone. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I don't see other students that want to intervene. Youssef? Yeah. Great. Can you show you
Hello.
on the screen? Hi.
I am in a laboratory, and I think some point about of instrument of the student because I'm maybe I very lucky, but because I have a graphic table with a pencil, and I think draw is very important for architect, and maybe is more important for student of architectural course because we need take a pencil and drawing, and this instrument there are some students lucky like me, but not all students adopt this instrument. And I think we need this instrument for view in a future possibility in a work sorry, I am very we need this instrument, and we need a relationship with the people. We have a different relationship. I think the student, if don't talk with the microphone, there are very stressed, and the teacher don't see this aspect, and all the students all students don't open your mind on your difficulty, and is very important, this aspect, not only only aspect about a course. I don't think is important, this aspect. Sorry, but I don't speak everyday English, and for me it's difficult.
No problem, Youssef. Thanks for your intervention. And we have a few minutes, I will say 30 minutes more or less, to discuss this topic we brought to the floor today. And I would like to invite Roberto, Manuela, and Alessandro, who are the coordinator for master programs here in Turin, to react to our speakers and our students. And maybe then we can leave the floor to our speaker again to just share with us remarks about this discussion. And of course, feel free to intervene. I'm leaving the floor to the discussion, so I open it to you. Feel free to intervene as you wish. The order is up to you. I don't scheduled any intervention first, so it's up to you.
Okay, maybe I can start just because I'm the first in alphabetic order. Both
Okay.
his name and
Alphabetic order. I will be the second one.
Yeah, I usually come first, so I'm used to do that.
I'm last.
In these cases, in these embarrassing cases. So thank you, all of you, for having organized this, and thanks to our guests for the interventions, because I think they're being really, really interesting, especially because I had the feeling in hearing you that this crisis have somehow unified our experiences in teaching and also in frustration of teaching and learning architecture. And it is a very important aspect, I think, because maybe it's the first time I see and I feel that all over the world we're doing the same job. And it's not a secondary aspect of what I'm doing every day in my life. So another immediate thought I had by listening to you is that maybe we always talk about virtualization, and it seems that everything of this, a lot of aspects of our last experience are about virtualizing teaching. But I have also the feeling that this is not virtual. There's something which is really, really real. There's just one world, and we're all in it. And this world is crossed by COVID and whatever. And our time especially is real. So we have there is a consistency of time in its quality and its quantity, which is really valuable, and we have to be very careful in using it, in using our own time and in using students' time, because I think that many aspects, I mean, in my small experience in coordinating one of the master programs here in Torino, has been that sometimes students have been frustrated for this waste of time around the new experience and the experimentation we were doing with them. I think that also their frustration is real, and we don't have so many feedbacks from the students. Actually, this is another problem I witness in this year. It's very difficult. I mean, there are this kind of events or meetings in which we try to think back what happened to us, and somehow we do something here with some students, but we have hundreds of students, and most of them are silent and are also invisible. And I think this is something, I don't know, this is one of the main problems, I think, that we are not managing very well. Consider also that in some cases we have 50 students in one class, so it becomes quite difficult, especially at the bachelor level. And so I think also, and this is my last consideration, which is just an open reaction without any specific thoughts, of course. That depends that the levels, as Ilaria Valente said before, I think that there is a very different reaction among the bachelor students and the master students as well. So of course we have an immediate different approach in the two situations, but I witnessed that and I experienced different kind of different difficulties in this situation when we are. For instance, in the cases I had to give lectures and to have a one-way course, for instance, at the master degree theory of architecture course, I didn't have so many difficulties with the students. I could even say that in that case, the students reacted very well because they knew quite exactly what they had to do. They had to listen, they had to discuss after the lecture, they had to make some exercises. So it was very linear situations. But in the experience of the design units, this changed a lot, especially at the bachelor level. So in that case, we need to have some kind of affective relation with the students. And as a teacher, I do need that for doing things with them. It's also, I don't know how to say, it's instrumental to my pedagogic aim and purpose. It's not just a human attitude. It's also because I need to have a sort of exchange, of emotional exchange with my students. Otherwise, I cannot teach them. I cannot do things with them, draw with them. It's not because I love them. It's because I need to do that, pragmatically speaking. And in this case, I felt a sort of loop with the students because I was chasing them. I was trying to catch them somehow, and they didn't want to be caught at all. They want to hide, and they had the right to hide in this situation. So I think I would like to stress this aspect because it's something that is very difficult to share with colleagues, and in this very special situation with you colleagues from around the world, but also with the students. So these are my main impressions, and I stop here. So thank you very much for the time.
If you don't mind, I'll take immediately the floor, just also to limit the presentation now. All the guests know that I'm one of the Master of Science director or referent, in particular the one titled Architecture for Sustainability. So I don't know if you can see my notes. This is probably one of, I'm feeling in a very inconvenient position this time, because it's very difficult to be a discussant in this specific situation. Not because the items are irrelevant or not interesting. They are extremely interesting, but I don't know if we are really fit to facing up all the issues that are related to the pandemic we have been living since the last year. I took some notes during the speakers' presentations, and often I agreed with them about some important elements that today can be in any case considered as an interesting legacy for the future. I know that one of the questions mentioned by Daniela and the other colleagues was how do we intend to capitalize this experiment, actually this massively scaled experiment? I think that we have learned a lot of new things in general. The fact that now we are aware about the fact that there is a sort of interesting, let's say, superimposition between new technologies and what Ilaria Valente before mentioned as the craft Italian way of teaching, the bottega, as she mentioned it actually. And this is a kind of experience that can be useful to implement in the future. And I think that we are in the conditions, exactly like also the students asked us to go ahead, to try to, even when the pandemic will be over, I really hope it. And so even when the pandemic will be over, probably we will be in a different condition of teaching and learning, and that is a kind of legacy that can be very useful. I also think that the blended model is something that we have to announcing in our teaching activity. We have also to understand, exactly like Patrick mentioned, that probably the blended model is not merely a sort of division between some hours spent in a classroom and some hours instead spent in a virtual class. We have probably to understand that a blended model means to understand that there are several tools, several pedagogical approaches, and we have probably to find, let's say, a blend according to the kind of studio or of a kind of course we will act in. I think that we have a lot to learn about the blended model. Partially before, I tried to catch a photo, during his presentation, and it was interesting the fact that the blended model is sort of a flower with several items that actually only few times we had the opportunity really to investigate within our teaching activity. I think also that it is important probably exploit the opportunity related to the bottom-up approach. So the fact that probably the university must be open to a different kind of approach. It is true that in the past often there was a sort of top-down approach in the teaching activities. So the professor in front of the classroom speaking up to the students and so on. I think that, for instance, Telearchitettura itself can be considered as a remarkable example of a bottom-up approach, because it's true that Telearchitettura was born in an academic staff proposal, but it's also true that young researchers were mainly engaged in this kind of adventure, let's say. There is something that I think it is very important and was mentioned particularly by Rashida and partially also by Ilaria Valente. The fact that in any case, we have to work with a community idea. Even listening to students, I understood that there is a lack of this sense of community. Being a part of community means obviously being part of a virtual community. And it is true that the connections among different parts of the world can be improved thanks to the blended models or the fact that we are in a virtual connection with the others. But it's also true that a community is made of people who talk each other. I like to see the student in front of me. I like to see them faces. I like to understand their reaction when I talk with them. If they are bored, if they are interested, if I have to adjust my presentation. And finally, the importance of a community has, in my opinion, and there is a sort of, I think, coherency among all the presentations today presented about the fact that we have also to consider that as academics, we have to bear in mind that it is very important, a strong relationship between research and teaching. And sometimes the lack of a direct connection with the students make me, let's say, in a difficult position, because I really don't know if what I'm trying to explain them, when I'm trying to build up something, to build a correlation between research and teaching, the lack of this community make me probably, let's say, unsafe about my choices. And I think that is the relationship between research and teaching. It's something that, in my opinion, really need to be more investigated in the future. That's all for me. Thank you. Thank you to all. Thank you for this opportunity. Manuela.
It's my turn. You have told almost everything. My colleagues have already highlighted all the main issues and the main topics. When I found the lecture, the intervention very, very interesting, and I agreed with the speakers and my colleagues. And in particular, during the last year, I've practiced both total online lessons and blended lessons. And I could realize that the best way maybe it's to take advantage of the opportunities which are offered by the online learning, but at the same way keep them through and use them in organizing hybrid learning, taking advantage of the online opportunity offered by online lessons, but at the same time keep doing face-to-face activities, engaging and promoting the engagement of the students. I was I found very interesting the intervention of Rashida concerning the problem of alienation of the students, which I think is one of the main problems. And also we have to fight the alienation of the students. And at the same time, we have to try as much as possible to promote the engagement of the students. And as she said, we have to learn how to do it, because we have tools, we have become able to use these tools, but it's not so easy to promote the engagement of the students. And we know how to do it in a classroom, in a face-to-face, during a face-to-face activity, but it's not so easy to do it in a remote way during virtual classrooms. It's often difficult. We have difficulties in see the face of the students. They do not switch on their webcam. They do not turn on the microphone. So, and when it's important to build the community, to listen to what they think. So it's important to see them. So also to understand if you was able to explain what you are teaching, if they have understood, if they really are interested in what you are explaining, if they want to intervene and say what they think. And it's easier in a face-to-face activity to make them intervene and to communicate, rather than when you do a lesson in a remote way. It's almost very difficult to hear their voices and see their faces. And that's these are the cons the students highlighted in her intervention, and I think it's something that we have to try to solve, learning how to do this kind of activity in a remote way, learning how to better guarantee the engagement of the students. So we have to attend courses to make somebody teach us how to do it, so as to improve these type of learning. So maybe we certainly have to capitalize what we have learned in the past year, take advantage of the opportunities offered by the online activities, but at the same time, we have to learn how to guarantee the involvement, how to promote a sort of face-to-face activity, even do it in a remote way. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much to all of the discussants. Perhaps we can give the word back to the speakers. I think that all of the comments were really interesting, and they really highlighted how the issue, the core issue here is about, of course, the exchange and the different degrees of mediation of exchanges. No, both Manuela and Roberto, and for example, Alessandra was saying, how can we speak of a difference between the virtualized world and the normal world? Now, perhaps this difference is no more, and we cannot even speak of a blended, because it's all a constant flux of exchanges. So if the guests would like to add something to this, this would be really interesting.
Maybe I have some reflections in when we made a study in Antwerp of the whole university about numbers of after 1 year or 1.5 years of pandemic. The results were not worse, even better. The marks were higher, and there was no more students left or stopped with their studies. So apparently there is nothing really dramatical for society. The teachers were asked whether the students would be able to achieve all the learning outcomes as they were written in the study guide, because this is the formal contract with the student. And if not, there was a formal decree by law that we could make exceptions of competences and take a kind of accountancy to maybe shape them in the next year or so on. But there were almost no competences that could not be developed. So you could wonder, what's the problem then? So I think there are several observations. First, I think there is a very strong resilience in students. We also could see that there is a much higher focus on what they are doing because there is less distraction in student life. The student life is never included in the learning outcomes, as if it has no effect on how they develop as a human being. And it's not taken into account as a contribution to their professional life or to their future life in general. But we do value it. But we have no single clue how to include it in what we value. And that's also a problem. We feel that we have a problem, but apparently, in formal terms, we can't really point to it. And now we are desperately trying to say what could be this shortcoming of our current situation. So I think this is one set of observations. But I think, and taking care, I think, is another one that I could hear in the other presentations. I really think that the pandemic made us more aware that we have to take care for students, and particularly to reach out to those that disappear and that we don't know that disappear. And I think these things like digital inequality is really something that was already present, but now this becomes very, very obvious and apparent. And I agree with Youssef that this tool is fantastic. I even started sketching again because I got an iPad Pro from the school with Morpholio, and I started sketching. It's amazing, the possibilities. And I know other colleagues that started sketching. So I still think that we can include hand drawing, but there is a huge risk about this digital inequality. And I think this taking care will be an inclination that hopefully we will keep out of the COVID. But then I think at another level, we don't have to see what we miss now, but use this occasion as the final slide of Patrick to see what comes up, what pops up in this extreme thing. And then I think we discovered things that about how students communicate. And again, I speak in this detached way of students and me as a teacher, because I really do think that there is a possibility that a deeper reality for them is really different than how we think. I have two sons, the difference is 3 years, and they behave different in terms of how they use digital means. So I really think it has gone very, very fast, and there is a kind of new era in how certain generations think and use devices to be connected. And I would take into account that I maybe cannot understand really deeply in which ways they are connected, in which ways the exchange through icons is a way of what we read in a smile or not. And I think we have to take this into consideration. And then if you talk about bottom up and top down, there is a risk. You can work bottom up, but if the top is not able to understand how the bottom thinks, then they make something else out of it. And then the solution remains very superficial.
I agree completely with Johann about that, because digitalization could provoke fragility. And this is, it's enough. We could notice that there is a problem of accessibility of the tools, and that this type of fragility could affect the senior citizens, so the older populations, and people that live in personal or population that is affected by poverty, and so on. So this is a gap that we have to take care about this problem. This is one point. The other one that maybe is connected with the problem with the international communities. I am enough curious to the policies that the universities could enhance starting from the pandemic. I could give you some samples. Student in presence pay a particular fee. Then students in remote could pay another type of fee. This could be a policy, and I want to see how many, not maybe in the domain of architecture, because it's a little bit more difficult because of the topics that we faced before, the idea that we have to work by hands and so on, and we have to stay in our rooms, but in other domains, probably the university will improve online teaching. And this is a risk in a certain sense. Exactly as the home working could be improved in general in the community, in our communities. Probably a lot of offices will be abandoned because a lot of people will stay at home, and so in our cities, building for offices become less interesting. So maybe we will have a lot of dynamics that we can not imagine now, but that maybe will start after the pandemic, even because we will have to face the crisis, the economic crisis. And so this could be an element that we are not treating about, but it's in the we have to take in account in our agenda, I think.
I would like to build on some of the points that Johann and Ilaria just made. And one of my concerns, and I think our concerns within my institution, are that we found that we have been very successful at meeting the needs of some students. And as Johann said, in some cases, even students are focusing more. We think that they are establishing more healthy behaviors in terms of regulating their sleep and managing time. But in other cases, we're actually seeing students really struggling, and the divide between, or the gap, if you will, between the students who are performing really well and the students who are struggling has actually widened. So while we're really excited to see the performance of students kind of managing their time well and managing their stress, we also are really concerned about the students who aren't. And it's a smaller percentage, but as Ilaria said, it often breaks down along socioeconomic lines. So it's often, first generation college students that don't have the support network at home. Maybe they don't have the space, maybe it's technology, maybe it's work that's distracting them, or not distracting them, but taking their time. But these things are harder for us to predict and more difficult for us to respond to. And the kind of collective student community that often will alert us to problems and support these other students isn't able to respond in the same way. So it's, for me, highlighting these discrepancies that existed before, but are even more pronounced right now. And at the same time, in our institution, while most programs or a lot of programs have seen a decline, our architecture admissions actually increased significantly last year. And I don't know if we're one of the more affordable institutions. A lot of things happen, so it's hard to predict exactly why. But we've never seen the number of students have to repeat a studio ever before within some of our, especially our early year students. And our ability to refine our curriculum to be more inclusive of the full student population that's interested in architecture seems very limited. And I think it's just kind of, the pandemic has just shone a light on those inequities that are embedded in the culture of our pedagogies before.
I would just add to that Johann's study that he talked about, showing that the students had learned what was expected to be learned. I I would wonder what the elasticity of that is. How long can that last? And students are working really hard to accommodate things that are not in their control. And I've been struck by their magnanimousness, that's not the right word, but their eagerness, their willingness to try things. But I wonder how long that can last. If we have to do this, if we spike again and we have to do this in the fall, will the students in fact be as resilient as they have been? And I think it's an open question. I think they're exhausted. I'll tell a little story that hopefully illustrates this. Our program administrator got promoted, and we sent out to former students and current students and faculty to make a short video, which we spliced together for her as a going away gift. And I watched it for the first time yesterday, and I have to tell you, I was struck by how these people who I've not seen in person in a year have aged. They've aged more than a year, and that was for students and faculty. And it was palpable how the look of stress and the aging on their face. And I think we're going to have a limited elasticity to people's willingness to do this. But I would go a step further and say, I think we can't go back to what we had. As an example, Stanford traditionally had a 10-week quarter and a 1-week finals period. This year, we got rid of the finals period, and instructors were told, if you really need a final exam, you have to take up one of your class times to do it. I would like to see Stanford continue that and basically say high stakes examinations were a bad idea before the pandemic, and they are a bad idea during a pandemic, so let's not go back. Now, whether that will happen, I don't know. Our graduate programs have gotten rid of standardized testing requirements for application. Some of that has to do with a variety of social justice issues and implicit bias in the examinations, but some of it has to do with just trying to take something off the plate of a student in a difficult time. So I think I think we're at a tipping point that if we do the right things and we can all come back together on campuses this fall, we'll be okay. If we have to do this for another year, it would be interesting to have this conference in another year and find out where we really are. And I think it would be a bad place.
Thanks, John. I guess I'm up next. I suppose just a couple of things. Just first of all, I'm struck by how much we all have in common. One of the things about being, as we all are, working from home and slightly isolated, is you do tend to think of yourself as the only person in the world with these problems. What I find great about today's whole session is realizing that we're not alone. And I mean that in a couple of ways, that I'm smiling and nodding a lot of all the presentations today and the comments that came afterwards and what the students were saying, that all of it was familiar to me. The big ticket ideas about connectivity, even down to small things like the point that John just made about high-risk exams. We've just had exactly the same conversation in our university just last week about a number of people who were married to high-risk exams, that they've had to move away from them. And now a couple were saying for the first time, maybe we didn't need them in the first place. And some of these people I've known for more than 10 years having this conversation. Myself, I would be maybe foolishly optimistic that this is going to make a big change for the better, I think. I would be optimistic that I do think come September, we'll be in a version of normality close to where we are. I do agree with what has just been said. It's been going on, I think, for most of us now for a year, and people are getting really tired. I am really impressed with the resilience of all the students and the staff in this process. It has been a remarkable year in that sense. And it's kind of funny going back to what Johann talked about. we found exactly the same thing. What's kind of fascinating to us, and I think Rashida touched on it as well, is that when you actually look at the statistics on the outside, the performance of students has improved. Like the number of students progressing, passing is better than it was before. But when you look a little bit deeper in the figures, you can see that the split between those succeeding and those struggling is bigger. So that the students who don't make it and are struggling, they're struggling in a much, much worse way than before. Like their marks are falling off a cliff. So it does show that there's a divide emerging. Like to me, it's about the idea of connectivity, change, community, and control. They're the four things I think about. And I think about this as saying that the pace of change has never been this fast, and it'll never be this slow again. Because of what we've gone through, I think what's going to happen next is going to be a big change. I think we as educators and students need to make sure that we retain control of that change. And we do that by calibrating what has worked well and making sure we don't lose the bits from the past. And we had a great talk about the history of drawing by hand and the importance of making things and learning by doing, that we make a good case for why elements of that need to change and accept that in this new world, some things will change. I think it is about then dealing then with connectivity. And connectivity exists in a sense that what the online world can give us is it can connect all of us in a way that we haven't been before. The evidence that we're all here together talking, on a Friday afternoon, regardless of where we are, and we can all share our experiences as part of that connectivity. And that's one of the positive things that online learning can bring to the world. But also then we need to make sure that we don't lose that social aspect. And this is something that I'm really impressed by some of the work that Helena Webster did more than 15 years ago, when she was unearthing the whole idea about how we learn. And it's not just lectures, it's not just tutors telling you what to do. The amount of learning that students learn from each other is huge. And very simply, you can see that in terms of that students who live together, like in Ireland, we don't have a dorm system, but we have situations where students, get apartments together. They tend to do better than students who are more isolated. And the whole idea of connectivity is really, really important. So when we come back to an approaching of normality, which I hope comes in September, we need to get the balance right between what the connectivity the on-world can bring us and what connectivity we need to retain from the traditional studio model. So again, just want to thank everybody for inviting me along today. I've learned a huge amount today. And I found it really, really fascinating to see how much we have in common. Thanks.
Thanks everyone for closing up your thought. I would just like to try to summarize really briefly what's on the table now. So what will be next? What will be our activities next semester? Hoping that we will be able to perform a teaching and learning in person. I can just say I retain from these 3 hours spent together that for sure new tools will remain. For sure new ways of relationship between us will remain on the table. For sure, something that is hidden will be shown on different level. And on one level, we experimented discrepancies. Rashida was telling us these, and we have to deal with this problem. Probably policies that Ilaria took to the discussion are a mean to face these kind of discrepancies. But on the other hand, John, Patrick, and also students pointed out the importance of the community of practice through new ways of relationship, through new tools, and maybe through new policies. Maybe we'll be able to break that power, the relation of power that was cited. And I will add both soft power and hard powers that are in place in the community. And by breaking these, let's say, this usual way of interaction, maybe we'll be able through all these elements to build a new community of practice. One last thing that was hidden and now it becomes the more and more clear is the life of people that's behind our interaction. And so students became persons, more person than what we used to consider them, and maybe also teacher and instructors became more person and humans than what was before, because all of us on both sides have to deal with struggle in life, generally speaking. These are some elements, of course. There's much more in what you said. I really thank you, John Barton, Rashida Ngul, Patrick Flynn, Ilaria Valente, Johann Walsh. I would like to thank also Alessandro, Armando, Roberto, Giordano, Emanuele Mattone for being the discussant, all the students that intervened, so Alice, Youssef, and the others. And I would like also to thank Paolo Mellano, the head of the department, and Carla Bartolozzi, who wasn't able to reach us. She's the dean of the School of Architecture. Last but not least, I would like to thank Dalila Tondo and Tommaso Listo for technical support, which is technical, but also it's a kind of a real support in an important sense for the project. They're not technicians, they are part of the editorial board. And of course, the advisory board that are supporting us during these activities. We spent 3 hours together, more or less. Maybe we are a little bit tired. So if the editorial board doesn't want to add something, I thank all of you, and I remember you that we are planning to put all these recording of these talk on Tel'Architettura channels, and we hope being able to prepare a publication. Of course, it will be an online publication with this intervention and other materials that we collected during 1 year of activity of Tel'Architettura. We hope to be in touch with you for the next month, and to see, to not repeat these symposium next semester, as John underlined, but maybe to do some other things, and maybe in person. And I thank you all again for staying for us so long during this conversation.
Bye. Goodbye. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Nice to meet you again.
Thank you for having me.
Bye to all. See you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.